called, and we will go from whenever I type. My project is about the divide between, or about, no, this. My project is about consumer versus, not consumer. My project is about non-commercial versus commercial technology, essentially. So consumer grade programs and websites that you can use that could, if used correctly, enable you to create content that could rival or surpass commercial grade content. In other words, allowing amateur creatives equal or better opportunity at being hired or getting recognised for their good content or good work over commercial businesses, essentially. The overall theme of my project that I've been rolling with is machinima and use of non-commercial, so consumer grade programs to allow you to use kind of out there techniques with machinima to create content and program to create content. Some of the more influential people who've done this are Rooster Teeth, Rocket Jumper, as well as smaller YouTube channels who focus on singular games. A good one is Captain Jack, who use space engines like me and thus creates his own stories and ideas from it. Another YouTuber who does this but using the DayZ mod is Frankie on PC, and he will be in DayZ and he will set up his own little scenarios, or he will meet random people and record the scenarios that and situations they get up to with them. But he'll almost frame it from as if he was a survivor in the game rather than someone just playing the game. And he'll give his character in the game a actual character and personality. And this is some of the things that people are already doing with machinima. Rooster Teeth and Rocket Jumper have progressed a lot more from being non-commercial because they've now got TV series that they've made, as well as going to massive amounts of conventions and such, and actually getting paid for what they do, or making money off of what they do as a company now, rather than just a group of creators who wanted to make their dream real. Going into my pitch and presentation to my tutors, initially I was slightly nervous about it, and then that faded very quickly since I had confidence in my idea and different versions of my idea I could pitch to them. Should the first idea I had fail, the first pitch I did went, well, not as bad as it could have gone, but the first idea I had was denied, and so I repitched another idea, which is the one that I've been developing in this project, which went well. It was received incredibly well, and I was able to go ahead and make this project because of it. The feedback I got from the first pitch generally had, because the way I was talking about it was whether machinima was a viable option to make things in, which is already proven yes by just companies already out there solely based on machinima, such as Rooster Teeth before they made that TV series I mentioned. So the feedback was it seemed very focused on doing this, improving this, which has already been proved yes. My second pitch got feedback of it very focused like the first one, but there's a lot more to explore and it's much more interesting in their eyes. This one was much more interesting in their eyes, that was. in my opinion, I could have probably improved my presentation by having slightly more in it, because my presentation wasn't that many slides, but they got across the point they needed to. So yeah, it's the only thing I would improve is maybe one or two more slides about possible target audience and such. But at the time, I wasn't overly sure on what my target audience would end up being. Overall, the project ended up kind of in the middle ground. I'm not overly happy with it because there's more I could there is definitely more that I could do with it and do for it, but it didn't turn out overly bad considering the circumstances and problems I encountered on the way. The feedback I received so far about my project is that it's good, very engaging, very interesting, something that not many people have actually looked into, as well as that some of the stuff that I've done so far is very relevant and on task and looks good, which I agree with in a way. The final product doesn't actually look as good as some of the things I did in my research, but that's because of limitations that I encountered. My proposal itself that I presented very much has changed. So the first version of my proposal was of course for the first pitch, and then the second version was for this project. It has developed over time. So instead of just being to prove a statement I made, which was consumer grade technology will soon is equal to or soon will surpass commercial grade technology. It still has that at its core, but it's not just technology at this moment. So how people who use consumer grade technology, or people who aren't quite massive companies or large groups of people, so the small time creatives out there, can surpass the big production companies in a way, is what my project has eventually boiled down and developed into. As for completing everything I set out to do, I have completed almost everything that I set out to do. So initially I set out to create an infographic as well as the product even, but events happened and I no longer had time to create the infographic as well as do everything I now had to do. So it changed to producing the videos and then the actual portfolio itself and the subsequent recordings in the portfolio, which are all uploaded to YouTube, became my project as a whole rather than just that one infographic being my production. The entire portfolio was my production itself. The key areas of development that I did undergo, as I was saying, was the project itself developed into consumer versus commercial people, so how they would surpass the commercial world in a way. And the way this then developed from was that my very, very first idea, which I didn't end up I ran past someone and they kind of went, nah, it might not get approved, so I changed it a bit, was use of camera angles and the study of camera work in machinima, and subsequently how real life camera skills would transfer into a game world and how you would use the camera in the game rather than how you would use the camera in real life. This I didn't end up pitching and went for how viable machinima was. So I could do that project I just said in a lesser way and tie it into making a machinima project, which got denied. So I went to proving the consumer grade technology was almost equivalent to commercial tech, which then developed halfway through into trying to save money for creatives, at which point I kind of stopped myself and thought about what I wanted to do, which was to help people like myself or other creatives in my kind of position make more or be able to do what they want for less, and not had to worry about, oh, I can't get this big program, so I had to make do with this. Whereas starting off with a good program that's free, you no longer had to do the, oh, well, I had to make do with this idea. To get all my information, I did several experiments as well as exploration. So the exploration I did was mostly into exploration of short films, fan fiction, modding, and through those how community develops. Because the idea I got after the major problem I had was, how can you use the programs you're using that are free and other elements to make yourself better, essentially. The idea I then had was community, and how community develops things even when you don't want them to develop it. Case in point, fan fiction and modding. So through modding, I explored what makes a mod, what makes people want to mod games, and why people want to mod games, as well as what modding does to a community, which in turn resulted in some very interesting conclusions that directly affected my project itself, or the videos I made for the project. As in, I then used a couple of mods in those videos and experimented with some mods in my experimentation. Fanfiction itself didn't quite affect the overall development of my project. More so that it helped in just standard research for my project. So the idea that people don't quite understand what it is, and the idea that they don't understand it, so they don't quite like it. Whereas there are many people who know what it is, understand it, and love what it does for communities. Other than the fact that it can completely rip communities apart, some things it does. It can unite tons of people under one banner, or several banners in some cases. As for my experimentation, all of my experimentation was done in-game with Space Engineers, the medium I was using for my machinima. And the experiments all kind of developed the project further in their own way. So my experiments into how the drone system in Space Engineers led me to disregard it entirely, since the drones were very clunky, slow, too fast, too slow, didn't fly like a real craft should fly. And you could see there was kind of flying, stopping, turning, then flying a bit more, which is how the drone system works, which is a brilliant way for the drones to work in-game if you want them to go on little patrolling loops of go here, nothing there, go to the next point, nothing there, go to the next point, come back. Whereas you can't have them make them go fly to this point but avoid everything in your way in nice curvy paths, which is kind of what I wanted them to do. This in turn led me to experiment with other features of the game, which were gravity, artificial gravity and artificial mass, which allows you to essentially shoot ships and blocks out of gravity cannons, which a gravity generator is set up in an even pattern, top on the up, down, left and right of the mass cube, and the mass cube then gets fired out when you turn it on. If gravity generators is turned on. This then led me to the fact that gyroscopes weren't strong enough to keep them stable and craft stable when they were fired out of gravity cannons, unless they were flat, ultimately symmetrical craft like cubes went out of gravity cannons really well, or rectangles, as long as the mass cubes were evenly spaced throughout the craft and throughout its centre of mass, which in Space Engineers is very hard to do with curved craft like what I was dealing with, or semi-curved craft, because Space Engineers doesn't deal with curves really well. This then led me to remembering that gyroscopes in the game can be overridden and can give you a slow yaw, pitch or roll, or really fast yaw, pitch and roll, depending on how much power override you give it. So it comes out in meters a second, so how many meters a second you want it to spin round. So 100 meters a second is kind of really, really, really fast. That's you know 1 miles per minute, which is very, very fast. It's faster than a lot of things. But I was able to do that, and with thruster override, which allows you to apply constant force with the engines without having to control it yourself or have an AI control it, I was able to get the ships to curve quite nicely, like they were pulling up from a dive, which is what you see in the clip I was using. And the rest of my experiments were just experiments into whether using the voxel tool in a certain way works, whether it doesn't work, or it was just straight up building of the set that I ended up using, which in turn just helped me figure out a few bugs and kinks with the thing, and make sure that the almighty clang of Space Engineers, which is just Space Engineers derping out and bugging, which it does quite often with different blocks, didn't happen whilst I recorded. Which the final project, you see a few things that I didn't quite take into account, so explosives, not explosive pushing blocks around, which is very entertaining when you look at it and notice it, and actually adds to the project a little bit. From what I know, there is no one else who have done a project like this. So from what I've researched briefly and just know from generally being interested in my project and knowing this beforehand, but being able to without being able to find the sources, I'm sure anyone listening is very, very aware of the scenario I'm talking about. I know this, but I can't find the things to prove it, but I know it's true, kind of thing. But I do have a few bits of research I found, which is that no one has really looked into this to my knowledge. They might have as part of something else, but as a individual project, I couldn't find anyone who's actually looked into how consumers can make their projects and then sell it with community, as well as making it in a game machinima style. Even Rooster Teeth, who essentially did this, they had no one talking about what they actually did. They had people talking about at the start of Rooster Teeth, we were like 6 guys in an office, and we made Red vs. Blue on Halo, and then we just carried on making it, and the community grew from there. They don't say how the community helped or hindered the project itself, which is basically, I might be the first one to do a project like this, to my knowledge. Even my tutors even said that they've never heard of these kind of things. One of my tutors never heard the term machinima until my project. And that's very, very good, very, very interesting thing. And that's just the fact that I might be the first at doing this is what drove me to do it so well, or to do it as much as I wanted to do it. As for what people have thought about my project so far, I haven't been able to pitch it to my audience as of yet, but feedback from tutors and lecturers have said that they liked the way the project ended, and they liked the way that the project is, and they liked how it works and how it kind of flows, and how everything is in there and has its own kind of place in the work. So my audience research led me to use surveys for my other bits of research. My short film research led me on to fan fiction, and fan fiction led me on to community led me on to modding led me on to modifying stuff in my game world to allow me to do more with the game, and directly affected the entire project. Without the flow, there would be nothing to do. Or nothing that to flow in through people and flow through the project, and it would all be disjointed, which is why I knitted it the way I did. As for why, in my opinion, the final product I did, so the video I produced, there was essentially a remaking and transcription of the scene that I chose, worked, and you could see, if you looked at the first one then looked at my one, you could see the similarities and you could see what it was. On its own, it looks like a battle scene that I intended to look like. It looks like the bigger ship is clearly winning, but it doesn't win without damage or being hit. And overall, it reflects what I wanted it to do quite well. The overall project, piece that I produced, the portfolio, in my opinion, very clearly demonstrates that to surpass the commercial world as a small-time creative, you need community behind you. You need your community to engage with you. You need your community to engage with others. You need your community to take your ideas and throw them out the window, bring them into their own home, play with them, throw them around, put them out there for you or with you, because then you can reach a much wider audience and produce a lot more. And that's what I want the project to reflect, and that's what it does reflect in my eyes. And it totally answers the brief that I set down, well, the second brief I set down, or the modified version that it's developed into. As for adapting and developing the project, there's not much I could adapt in the project to make it better, since everything I did was wholly about the project and focused on what I wanted the project to be, rather than other things that I brought into the project. But to develop the project, I could do more scenes, recreate more scenes to emphasize what machinima can do, or use different programs to make machinima, to emphasize what different programs you can use. I could also do much real research into how community develops and how community works together. I could have done more research into the Reddit experiments on community, or the game EVE Online, because that's, in my opinion, is just a giant experiment of how community works with each other. And these combined would elevate my project significantly, probably, in my opinion. The strengths and weaknesses of my outcome. So, for my video outcome that I put in the portfolio, the strengths are that it closely resembles the original CNOW's copying, and it's in my own kind of style. So I didn't want to copy it shot for shot for shot. So I have the basic notions of them taking down the shields, them taking down the big ship, or them attacking the big ship, and then the big ship destroying them as this basic plot line, but I don't use the exact same camera angles in all shots. And I have different ships exploding, or different amounts of ships, or different ways they fire, as well as it being redone to have practical weaponry rather than lasery weaponry. So they all fire missiles instead of bolts of lasers. Which is a strength, in my opinion, on how it works. The weakness of my final video is probably how short it is, but it's actually longer, slightly longer than the original CNOW's copying. But maybe extending it to encompass a bit more, or different scenes being added, just to demonstrate skills more. Another weakness is probably how much isn't quite right with it. So you can recognize it as from Star Trek Discovery, but you can't strictly recognize what scenes and shots, which is partially what my goal was. But this is contradictory to what I've said the strength is, but it is a weakness because my original idea was to copy it essentially for shot for shot for shot. And as a result of doing that, but then changing it myself, it changed. Or my slightly make do, this is the best I'm going to get because of the program. Which is true. The shots that I got were the best things I could get because of what I was using. And it works really well on what it is. The overall weakness of my entire project, including the portfolio bit, is probably the lack of research. So I didn't do very small amounts of research, and I went quite in depth, in my opinion, on what I wanted to research. But I could probably have researched more, like I said. I could probably have researched more into community, or more into short films, definitely more into short films. As well as being able to possibly go and talk to people and actually do interviews rather than just relying on internet sources or YouTube interviews. Or done, like what I did with my practitioner report, actually done a report or research, in-depth research into who made this project and the background of why they made it, rather than just almost superficial. They made this, which is why they did this and this and this. Not quite. They did this because they like doing this and this and this and this, and their drive comes from here, like I did with Nolan, or Christopher Nolan. The strength of my project is that it does convey what I wanted to convey. It does what I wanted to do, which is what you want from a project. If it doesn't do what you want it to do, you've done something wrong. Which is not what I believe. I've learned from this that community is a massive part of projects, and to not play to your community is to effectively doom your project. or to not play to the community you want interested in what you're making doom your project. In addition to that, I've learned that people really dismissive of fanfiction. My survey results were quite conclusive that people liked it, but the internet itself is a dark, dark, cold place when it comes to fanfiction. Why it's bad, why it's good, doesn't exist overly much. It was mostly all why we should eradicate fanfiction, or why we're scared of fanfiction. It was actually quite a struggle to find websites that spoke good about fanfiction, which I don't think is a reflection of fanfiction itself. I think that's a reflection of those who are more likely to write articles about it, that they're more likely to write about the negatives about it rather than the positives. So in the future I'd be able to use my knowledge of community to enhance my projects. Not just my knowledge of community, but my knowledge of what modders have to go through to enhance my projects. So if I ever consult people or make my own game, I know that the first thing we should probably do if it's a open world game or something similar is, if it's viable, open it to modding, because the community are going to elevate it to massively good levels, as well as make it hilariously funny for some mods. Very well, very easily, very quickly, and it's going to give us that edge that we probably want with the game. Alternatively, modding, if I'm focusing programs for it, advertising to modders, this program is free, because you don't get paid for modding, but you sure as heck want programs to do it in the future. Or my work with Space Engineers and Machinima, I now know so much about Space Engineers, I could probably do a short film of 40 odd minutes in Space Engineers, and get away with it, and do it really well through my project. But it's transferable skills, so any program that has a free cam mode, you can do Machinima in. Any program that doesn't have a free cam mode in, you can do perspective Machinima in. So you're in through the eyes of your character, or you tell it through the eyes of someone who's new to the character, or you tell it from journal entries about the character, with the camera being the character's eyes as you post recording all of it, talk about what happened as what happened plays. And that's what I can do in the future. Or in the future I can just show this project to companies who have seen it, or talk about this project to companies who have seen what I've done, or more so heard about my research through YouTube and these recordings, and go from there. What you can do with Machinima, what you can do with other programs, why you should include community. As for what I could probably improve next time, most of the things I've said. So the weaknesses of more research being required, or more research would be liked to have. I would like to have more research. Probably backing up my files. So the big mistake, or big dilemma that I encountered halfway through, well, not even halfway through my project, 4 weeks before the end of my project or so, was that I had everything saved on a hard drive. I did make backups, but that was before Easter. So I had everything saved to hard drive backups, and it was all very much done and good. Until my hard drive decided to no longer read on any computer and essentially broke. Which afforded me to lose all the work I had done and have 4 weeks to remake my entire project in its own right. I didn't lose all the work, but I lost a hefty chunk of my work. 3 weeks at least worth of work, probably more. So in the next, including all the research I had initially done, including links and sources. So after that, I had to essentially redo all my research, redo all the project part, and make it work in 4 weeks. In honesty, I've done it in 5 weeks, so I missed my initial deadline by a week. But the end result is that I have a finished project that does what I want it to do, and it does it well. Which is what I want, which is what every creator wants, is what they want done well, the way they want it in a way. So what I could probably improve on is backing up my files more and in more numerous places, which I have already started doing. Other than that, the research and probably not recreating a scene particularly, or picking a different program to recreate scene on, or generally just a different scene. 'Cause the scene I picked was from a very CGI special effect heavy program. In fact, the entire scene, other than scenes with people in it, which were cut out because it was entirely about the spaceship, was entirely CGI and very much focused on the shininess and explosions of the crafts and how they responded to physics. But in general, I could have probably picked a different scene, like a Battlestar Galactica scene or an Interstellar scene, which would have been easier to do, but would disregard my fanfiction research. Because whilst Battlestar Galactica has fanfictions written about it, not as many as Star Trek, which I decided to go, or Star Wars, which I was going to go with, but it has stuff for it. Interstellar doesn't have. I think it has no more than about 6. And even then, those are generally, one of those, to my knowledge, was about the continuation of the story. So he did 2 particular ones. One was the continuation of Earth. So they got to the planet, he marked out and how they survived and lived on there. That ended up with humanity dying. And the other one where he steals a spacecraft, goes through the wormhole and ends up somewhere else and discovers entirely new species, and how he interacted with those, and then how he eventually got back to the planet to find humanity whilst he was gone had died. Well, all of it. Most of it had died by the time he got back, and then it all died with him and the rest of everything he knew. So that was my entire project. All in all, it ended really well. I got my points across. I did everything I wanted to do. I could have done a bit more, but problems arose and I dealt with those to the best of my ability, and I've completed my extended project in its entirety.